All right. Good morning, everybody. Today is Friday. Yes, it's Friday, September 8th, 2017. And this is Before the First Cup of Jules here on UCY.TV. Happy Friday, everyone. It is an overcast and drizzly 58 degrees in upstate New York. So where do we leave off on Wednesday? We titled the show Aggressive AI, DARPA Mapping IP Addresses, World War III, and ruling the world. We talked about a few things. DARPA now is set on a plan to map 80% of all IP addresses and be able to scan them by putting in a quote-unquote agent on each network to be able to tell whether or not it is outputting botnet attacks. And then we have Putin come out to some school children and talk about how the future of AI is going to be those who rule artificial intelligence are going to rule the world. And Elon Musk coming out multiple times to the UN and then in comment to Putin to warn us that World War III will be started by artificial intelligence. And as we've continued to look at all that, we've talked about all kinds of different technologies. We looked a lot at frequencies, and we have looked at atmospheric heaters before. And that one document I don't think I was supposed to find got password protected, and I was able to go to a cached scrape of the document. And they talked about doing real-time atmospheric heating laboratory experiments in our actual atmosphere. And they were so excited about it. But it makes you wonder, as we are looking at floods and fires and Category 5, biggest seen in a decade, hurricanes. And now last night or the night before, we had a pretty massive solar CME. I believe it was an X class that was aimed toward Earth. And now we have this big 8.1 earthquake in Mexico. Makes you wonder when the locusts are going to come. Well, pretty interesting. Someone in chat actually said the same thing, and I was thinking about that this morning. So I took a look. If you can even believe it, and I bet you can, satellites can now forewarn of locust plagues. So we've talked a lot about satellite technologies and some of these things that they are launching to be able to blanket the planet with surveillance and dashboards for all kinds of different things. Satellites are helping to predict favorable conditions for desert locust swarms, which pose a threat to agricultural production and subsequently the livelihood and food security. Desert locusts are a type of grasshopper found in the Sahara, across the Arabian Peninsula, and into India. And the insects are usually harmless, but when they swarm, they can mitigate across long distances and cause widespread crop damage. During 2003 to 2005 plague in West Africa, more than 8 million people were affected, and up to 100% losses were reported on cereals, 90% on legumes, and 85% on pastures. It took nearly $600 million and 13 million liters of pesticides to bring the plague under control. Swarming occurs when a period of drought is followed by good rains and then rapid vegetation growth, just like we're experiencing in the West. These conditions trigger a period of abundant breeding and overcrowding, and the increased contact with other locusts can lead to the formation of large swarms. This behavior makes locusts more dangerous than grasshoppers. A 1 square kilometer swarm contains about 40 million locusts, which eat about the same amount of food in one day as 35,000 people. In other words, a swarm the size of the capital of Mali or the capital of Niger would eat the same amount of food as half of the entire population of the respective city. Satellites can monitor the conditions that lead to swarming locusts, such as soil moisture and green vegetation. And the European Space Agency recently teamed up with the international partners from Algeria, France, Mali, Mauritania, Morocco, Spain, and the UN Food and Agricultural Organization to test how data from satellites such as the ESA's soil moisture and ocean salinity mission and can be used to predict locust plagues. At the UN Food and Agricultural Organization, they have decades-long track records of forecasting plagues and working closely with countries at the greatest risk to implement control measures. By bringing our expertise together with the European Space Agency's satellite capabilities, we can significantly improve timely and accurate forecasting. Early warning means that countries can act swiftly to control potential outbreaks and prevent massive food losses. So, how do you stop a plague of locusts? Well, Motherboard Vice actually did a story about this on January 28th, 2016. Despite calling to mind biblical curses, locust plagues are actually a very modern problem. Right now, Argentina is preparing for the worst locust plague that it has seen in 60 years, never before seen. And there is evidence that a warmer temperature and more intense weather events influenced by climate change are the cause of locust plagues to shift globally. They are descending on new locations, ding, ding, and in some cases becoming more frequent and more severe. And when you take a look at what a locust plague looks like, it's a pretty disturbing thought. So what are we doing to stop it? Well, for years, our main strategy has been to simply watch the weather. We know that locust plagues are affected by weather patterns, so understanding these patterns has helped us better predict where plagues might occur, says Ariane C., sustainability researcher at Arizona State University, who investigates the spread and mitigation of locust plagues. We're working to find any outbreak pockets of locusts where they are young before they start flying and then targeting them with pesticides. That's where we're at right now, but we think we can take a step back even before that. And I'm going to predict that they're going to, at some point in the future, suggest that we might genetically modify them or infect them with Wolbachia bacteria like they're doing with the mosquitoes so they cannot reproduce. That's what they're doing in Argentina, spraying pesticides in a frantic attempt to decrease the locust population before it matures into adults, growing wings and becoming a cloud of destruction, decimating the country's cotton and sunflower crops. The jury is still out to what led to the locust population surge there. It has nothing to do with the biotech labs making genetically modified bugs. No, but there is a contributing factor, and that is climate change has also contributed to more severe locust outbreaks in China. And the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization recently warned that climate change could lead to more locust outbreaks in Africa. There are 20 species of locusts in the world, and each of them has been impacted differently by the weather. Hold on one second. Hold the phone. Sorry about that. That was the wrong number, of course. But there are 20 species of locusts around the world, and each of them is impacted differently by the weather, says Cease. And that means that environmental factors are not one size fit all, although it is clear that changes in weather mean changes in locust populations. But generally speaking, hotter, longer summers hasten the locust development cycle, which can lead to more generations of locusts in a season, creating high population density. Wetter, warmer winters can have a similar effect by promoting growth of grasslands where locusts like to hang out, and heavy rains can also wipe them out in their development cycle. So look out, Northeast. It's been very wet this summer. Locusts are solitary insects most of the time, but when the population density reaches a certain point, their instinct to travel together and form a swarm kicks in, and that means that the only time to strike is to find locusts when they are young. But it gets more complicated because locusts in a manageable population are an important part of the ecosystem. Ding, ding. And scientists like Cease don't want to just wipe them out. They are hunting for solutions to keep locusts at bay without eradicating them, which is a tricky balancing act. And like I said, just wait, because they are going to genetically modify them, find a certain gene that they can switch off on certain locusts to cut the population in half, let's say. To solve this problem, Cease thinks scientists need to go beyond just weather monitoring if we hope to prevent and mitigate widespread locust outbreaks. Her lab takes a multi-pronged approach to locust studies, which is precisely why I talked to her. Monitoring the weather and killing off dense populations of locusts works some of the time, but it is not a great solution. And Cease's lab is one of the few that is trying other ways to fight back. Rather than looking at it as a purely ecological problem, Cease and her colleagues consider the economical and cultural influences at play as well. Her work and the work of others has shown that land use has as much of an impact on locust populations as climate and weather pattern. Cutting down forests, which act as a barrier between the populations, can increase population density. Overgrazing, too, creates a hotbed for locust growth, and understanding these influences, policies, and strategies can be put into place to limit locust outbreaks altogether. So blah, blah, blah. This is going on and on. It's like creating inventive ideas for farmers to help them make better crop choices and prevent the spread of locusts, but it results in fewer terrifying swarms of giant crop-dissolving grasshoppers. Maybe some dry policy research is exactly what we need. Wah, 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 wah. So as we have disasters, we have agencies such as FEMA stepping up. And I don't know if a locust plague across the United States would constitute FEMA, but it might. The secret history of FEMA, this is thanks to the Grimerica guys. I saw this on their page this morning. It's an interesting story. So consider the two men who were supposed to help run the federal government's disaster response agency hit a pretty quiet late August, and this is from September 3rd, 2017. Even as a once-in-a-thousand-year storm barreled into Houston, there are two veteran disaster response people, Daniel A. Craig and Daniel J. Kanuski, found themselves just sitting on their hands. Both have been nominated as deputy administrators in July of 2017, but Congress went on its long August recess without taking action on either selection, despite the fact that both are eminently qualified for the jobs. Leaving the roles open as the annual Atlantic hurricane season arrived was the clearest recent sign that FEMA, an agency whose success or failure translates directly into human suffering, avoided or exacerbated, barely registers in Washington. Which, who could believe that one? In fact, FEMA has always been at odds, an odd beast inside of the government, the agency that has existed far from the spotlight, except for the occasional high-stakes appearances during moments of critical need, and it can disappear from the headlights for years in between a large hurricane or series of tornadoes. But FEMA's under-the-radar nature was originally a feature, not a bug. And during the past 7 decades, the agency has evolved from a top-secret series of bunkers designed to protect U.S. officials in case of nuclear attack to a sprawling bureaucratic agency tasked with mobilizing help in the midst of a disaster. The transition has not been smooth, to say the least, and to this day, the agency's weird history can be glimpsed in its strange mix of responsibilities, limitations, and quirks. And then there's this fun fact. Along the way, FEMA's forefathers created a legacy that is too often forgotten. Inside the bunkers during the 1970s, the National Emergency Managers invented the first online chat program, the forerunner to Slack, Facebook Messenger, and AIM, which have together transformed modern life. But FEMA did not start off as FEMA. In fact, it has been reshuffled and reorganized more than perhaps any other key agency in U.S. history. Harry Truman started FEMA's forerunner, the Federal Civil Defense Administration, in the 1950s, and one newspaper columnist at the time had a succinct summation of the new agency's shortcomings. The Federal Civil Defense Administration had no authority to do anything specific or to make anyone else do it. And unfortunately, it is a criticism that would continue to ring true straight through the natural disaster like Hurricane Katrina. Bureaucratic indifference has marked nearly every aspect of the nation's homeland security operations, a point best indicated by the FCDA's evolution. And over the following decades, it migrated regularly between different departments and underwent nearly a dozen name changes and agency affiliations before eventually becoming the Federal Emergency Management Agency in the 1970s. After the 9/11 attacks, there was another reorganizational shuffling, and the agency finally ended up as part of the Department of Homeland Security in 2003. Most of these various predecessors to FEMA weren't all that concerned with civilian natural disaster. They were primarily focused on responding to nuclear war. The evolution to being the first call after a hurricane, flood, or tornado came about in part because it turned out America doesn't have all that many nuclear wars, and the equipment and supply stockpiles and disaster response experts of FEMA's predecessors were useful for something other than the apocalypse. FEMA was the result of Jimmy Carter's efforts to restore some primacy to civil defense planning, bringing it back into the spotlight after years of diminished budgets, and the administration threw its weight behind a congressional effort to reestablish what was then known as the Office of Emergency Preparedness under a new name, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, uniting the nation's disaster response for its planning with continuity of government. The secret programs that were supposed to snap into place in the event of a nuclear war. Created in April of 1979, FEMA brought together more than 100 programs from across the government. Publicly, the agency would be known for coordinating the government's response to national disasters like floods, hurricanes, and tornadoes. But few in the public understood that much of FEMA's resources went instead to its primary mission, coordinating the nation's post-apocalypse efforts, and that the majority of its funding and a third of its workforce was actually hidden in the nation's classified black budget. The agency's real focus and its real budget was known to only 20 members of Congress. And indeed, FEMA was hobbled from the start, limited by weak central leadership, full of political patrons, and pulled in multiple directions by its disparate priorities, some public and some secret. But as one Reagan-era assessment of the agency concluded, FEMA may well be suffering from a case of too many missions for too few staff and resources, and FEMA itself might be a mission impossible. Today, conspiracy theorists fear that FEMA is setting up concentration camps to house political dissidents. Google FEMA camps if you want to lose an hour or two in a rabbit hole. But the truth is a bit stranger. FEMA, as it turns out, doesn't construct camps for political dissidents, but it started by taking one over. The cornerstone of FEMA's secret world is a bunker in Virginia's Blue Ridge Mountains that served as a civilian government's primary emergency hideaway since the 1950s. Mount Weather, which I didn't know that was real. Mount Weather's name comes from its use as a research station and observatory for the Weather Bureau dating back to the 1890s. And the turn of the 20th century, the observatory was known for its pioneering science, using elaborate balloons and box kites to study the atmosphere at a time when meteorology was in its infancy. The nascent Weather Bureau, the forerunner of the National Weather Service, picked the isolated site because it was far away from that era's cutting-edge technology, which is the electrical trolley lines, whose troublesome electrical currents could throw off magnetic observations. We are looking to the future needs of a rapidly developing and intensely interesting branch of science, the observatory director explained. Of course it is. With atmospheric heaters, we are trying to build the very best observable observatory possible. Using the motor-operated rotating steel drums lined with as much as 40,000 feet of piano wire, Mount Weather's kite team broke its own world record in 1910, flying a kite 23,826 feet into the air, according to the lowest temperature, and recording the lowest temperature ever, which was 29 degrees Fahrenheit below zero, using a kite-launched instrument. As meteorology advanced and the better technologies arrived, the Weather Bureau handed off the majority of the 100-acre facility to the Army, which it then used as a World War I era artillery range. The government then spent the best part of the 1920s trying without success to get rid of the property. Later still, beginning in 1936, Mount Weather became the Bureau of Mines facility, where the agency tested various boring methods. The rock on the mountain was exceptionally dense, and the Bureau began building a narrow but lengthy tunnel into the mountain for experiments on blasting and drilling methods. During World War II, the government housed as many as 100 conscientious objectors there, ding, ding, pressing them into service as weather researchers to help develop better forecasts for the Northern Hemisphere. And after the war, the facility went back to the Bureau of Mines, which redoubled its efforts at developing new boring techniques. And in a lengthy 1953 report on the widely acclaimed problems solved by the mountain's engineers, the Interior Department bragged that from Mount Weather in the last few years has come a massive technical data on drilling, steel to use in drills, rods, diamond drilling, and related subjects. Its work on diamond drill bits was considered groundbreaking. The publication was one of the last public mentions of the site for decades, and even as the Interior Report went to press, the government began to slowly expunge the existence of Mount Weather from official mention. The Soviet Union now had atomic weapons, the Cold War was on, and the preparations for all-out nuclear exchange had to be made. So given its distance from Washington and its exceptionally hard rock, the pre-existing tunnel, and its pre-located boring machines, Mount Weather was a perfect place to outfit an executive branch bunker. If the worst happened, the American government could continue to function underground. And beginning in 1954, just after the Pentagon's backup bunker at Raven Rock became operational in Pennsylvania, the Army Corps of Engineers began a 4-year expansion project that would transform Mount Weather into the nation's largest underground complex. Operation High Point enlarged the original tunnels, excavating hundreds of thousands of tons of greenstone and hollowing out a cavern large enough for a medium-sized city under a mountain. More than 21,000 iron belts of reinforced roof were put in. While the facility wasn't completed until 1958, it began serving as the executive branch's main relocation site almost immediately, hosting Eisenhower's evacuation drill operation in 1954. According to perhaps I can never say this word, apocryphal story, everybody laugh at me, the first director of the Mount Weather bunker was given a simple commission directly from President Eisenhower. I expect your people to save our government, he said. And by the Kennedy years, Mount Weather included all of the amenities and life support systems of a top-of-the-line bunker. Helicopter landing pads and sewage treatment plants were atop the mountain, but underneath was where the real facility existed, with underground reservoirs for drinking water and cooling needs, diesel generators, a hospital, radio and television broadcast facilities, cafeterias, and its own fire department and police force. Some 800 blue mesh hammocks, which sat ready for evacuated personnel who would sleep in shifts throughout the day. Plastic flowers dotted the tables of the cafeteria. It was just one of the dozens of bunkers and relocation facilities that FEMA's predecessor agencies built around the country, including what the Federal Regional Center bunkers in places like Denton, Texas, Maynard, Massachusetts, Thomasville, Georgia, Bothell, Washington, and Denver, Colorado. The Denton Center, which first opened in 1964 and is still in use today, is a 50,000 square foot, two-level bunker that it could have supported several hundred officials for 30 days. It had its own drinking well, laundry facility, diesel generators, and 13-ton blast doors, and the facility kitchen could have served 1,500 meals a day, and its walk-in freezers could double as a morgue. That's pretty horrifying. The centers also included duplicates of vital records to help affected agencies maintain continuity of operations, and any of the facilities could be used by the president or any other high-ranking government leaders if they happened to be caught nearby during an attack, or they had broadcast booths ready to connect the nation's emergency broadcast system. The elaborate network of national bunkers and the unique responsibilities they had in hosting U.S. officials after nuclear attack made FEMA's predecessors and the national continuity of government program leaders in the developing field of computers and technology. By the early 1970s, Mount Weather, and what was then known as the Office of Emergency Preparedness, had amassed some of the most sophisticated and cutting-edge computers in the world to help it respond to the complex scenarios of an unfolding attack. So just like war games, the large specially built bubble-shaped pod inside of Mount Weather's East Tunnel contained several advanced computers which were disconnected from the network at 9 p.m. each night so that the teams could conduct classified research and computations until 8:30 a.m. the next day. Inside the pod, the room-sized UNIVAC 1108 supercomputer, which retailed for about $1.6 million at the time, represented the cutting-edge technology of multiprocessors, allowing the computer to do multiple functions at once. And I could tell you by some of the VAX and I'm trying to remember the other company, the HP UX systems that we used to configure and sell. Government agencies were probably the top purchaser of systems of that type. They're high-end, old-school Unix-type systems that could do multiprocessing and off-site storage, where you build your own storage facility to then back-end to, large clusters of high-powered computers. They represented cutting-edge technology of multiprocessors, allowing a computer to do multiple functions at once. I am at a loss to describe its maximum capacity, says a UNIVAC executive at the time, awed by the processing power installed at Mount Weather. Those computers deep inside Mount Weather helped spawn one of modern life's most transformative technologies, Murray Turoff was a young PhD graduate student from UC Berkeley when he crossed paths during a NATO conference in the 1960s in Amsterdam with Norman Dalkey, one of the lead developers on a RAND project known as Project Delphi. Its purpose, to help the government harness group decision-making. One evening after the conference was over, two of the computer scientists had intended to tour Amsterdam's famed red light district, but ended up talking late into the night about work Turoff was working on with war game simulations. Ding, ding. Both men were keenly interested in human collaboration, and Turoff was soon sucked deeper into the government's secret doomsday planning operation, joining the Office of Emergency Preparedness to work on collaboration and information sharing. Earlier crisis networks had been frustrating failures, and one primitive one created by the U.S. government during the Berlin airlift in the 1940s had been quickly overloaded by the volume of messaging. But by the Nixon years, computers had advanced enough to make such communication systems practical. Remember those 1970s. At the Office of Emergency Preparedness, Turoff worked with Dalkey's Project Delphi team to speed up the expert analysis and harness the knowledge of hundreds of informal and formal presidential advisors on emergency situations. His first crisis wasn't nuclear. It was Nixon's August 1971 wage price freeze, which attempted to pull the nation's economy out of an inflationary spiral. Under orders to deliver a monitoring network in just a week, Turoff developed a system in just 4 days that came to be known as the Emergency Management Information System and Reference Index. And it was inevitable acronym of EMISARI, which allowed 10 regional offices to link together in a real-time online chat known as a party line. And that must be all the FEMA regions that we have spread across the country. It's pretty interesting. While the system was meant to work in parallel with the normal Office Emergency Preparedness conference calls and faxes, Turoff and his team found that the EMISARI's efficiencies quickly outpaced everything else, and that the organization's conversations migrated online quickly. Entries were limited to just 10 lines to prevent, Turoff recalls, people writing typical government memos inside of the system. And in the first 10 weeks of the wage price crisis, the 80 officials on the system turned to EMISARI 900 times to enter data, and they exchanged nearly 3,000 messages, a phenomenal rate for the early days of computing. EMISARI proved to be the forerunner of the later electronic chat functions like AOL Instant Messenger and text messaging. So FEMA created the capability of text messaging. The system also included seven master text files that laid out general policies and guidance and a comprehensive list of actions being taken by headquarters and the various regional offices, as well as abstracts of news stories and press releases, all of which could be updated to near real time and disseminated nationally in an instant. So this would be command and control. After its first successful test during the wage freeze, EMISARI and its successor systems became an integral part of the Office of Emergency Management's response to other economic disruptions in the 70s, like the gasoline shortage, I remember that one, and the truckers' strike of 1974 and 79. And for an agency tasked with responding to a crisis that could unfold across the country simultaneously, EMISARI represented a huge breakthrough in computing, one that regional directors quickly realized would be a critical in community continuity operations. A conference capability would be highly useful in a nuclear attack scenario, particularly during a trans attack, an immediate post-attack period when everyone would have to be holed up and face-to-face conferences would be impossible. In 1974, a system for quickly gathering and storing important data was also emerging. Access to national resource databases and associated nuclear damage estimation models could support analysts attempting to figure out what could be done with what was left after a nuclear attack. As a matter of fact, the messaging system was an integral part of the growing number of computerized resources that the Office of Emergency Preparedness was building into its facilities, like Mount Weather, to serve as a backbone of the nation's crisis response systems. Two other major components, Civil Crisis Management System and its Contingency Impact Analysis System, and its Resource Interruption Monitoring System, which were meant to help officials respond to critical shortages and to shuffle much-needed resources around the country to respond to unfolding situations. Who wants to bet that these systems are all run on AI now? I'll guarantee you they haven't even mentioned it yet. The system has pre-programmed crisis scenario, each of which has clearly delineated steps and notifies each stakeholder in turn as their roles become critical. For the time, it was very advanced networking technology containing early versions of what later generations would recognize as email, bulletin boards, and chat functionality. The computer as a device to allow human groups to exhibit collective intelligence is a rather new concept. Ding, ding, collective intelligence, next to be swarms, Turov said. In 1976, and over the next few decades, attempts to design computerized conference structures that allow a group to treat a particular complex problem with a single collective brain, ding, may well promise more benefit for mankind than the artificial intelligence work to date. Well, talking about artificial intelligence, when the worst happens, these amazing robots will come to the rescue. This is out of Singularity Hub, which is a publication that Peter Desmandez and Ray Kurzweil have a hand in. The attacks of September 11th, 2001 will go down in American history for many reasons. The nearly deaths of 3,000 people, chief among them. A footnote in that particular history book is one of interest to us here. 9/11 was the first time robots were used in a real search and rescue effort in the United States. And that bit of an unofficial history comes from Robin Murphy, director of the Center for Robot-Assisted Search and Rescue at Texas A&M University and a leading expert in the field. In the 15 years since then, roboticists have designed all manners of machines to help mobilize rescue efforts and map disaster areas. There are small robots that can jump high and biobots, i.e. bug cyborgs, that can scurry through the rubble, and some are humanoid shaped while others resemble small Mars rovers, and a handful have been deployed into real-life scenarios, while many are still under development. In the book Robotics for Future Presidents, Murphy emphasizes the role that robotics researchers play in disaster response. Me and my colleagues, he says, are researchers in robotics, not disaster responders. Our job is to empower the responders with rescue robots that are easy to use and effective. Rescue robots don't replace people or dogs. They go to places where people or dogs can't go and assist responders in innovative ways. One of the most recent innovations involves not strictly robots, but we've talked about these cyborgs, and not of the two-legged variety. Researchers at the University of North Carolina State have created cyborg insects that they can control remotely. Ding, ding. Now they are betting that the bugs will prove to be valuable cartographers with the assistance of an unmanned aerial vehicle or a UAV. The idea would be to release a swarm of sensor-equipped biobots, such as remotely controlled cockroaches, ding, ding, into a collapsed building or other dangerous unmapped area, says Edgar Leberton, an assistant professor of electrical and computer engineering at NC State. In a press release about 2 papers describing his work, the technology developed by Labaton and colleagues would allow the biobots to move freely within a range of a beacon carried aboard the UAV, and the radio signals from the biobots are fed into a program that translates the sensor data from their movements into a map of the environment in which the bugs were released. Labaton's work is focused on the development of algorithms for mapping using multiple biobots, and he says by email that one of the biggest challenges is that typical strategies for determining position, such as GPS or visual sensors, are not well suited for the biobot swarm. This is why we had to develop a new methodology that only depends on weak localization information between the agents, he says, referring to the insect cyborgs. In particular, we only use and counter information between them whenever we get within a specific range of each other, and this led to the development of a new framework to manage this type of scenario. In the article on the framework for developing local maps and stitching them together was published in Robotics and Autonomous Systems. A second article on the theory of mapping based on mobile sensors' proximity to each other was published in the IEEE Transaction on Signal and Information Processing over Networks. Duncan Haldane from the University of California, Berkeley, developed the world's highest jumping untethered robot modeled on the Galligno, a nocturnal primate in Africa known for its amazing vertical leap. A visit to a FEMA search and rescue training site, inspired the robot named Salto, which stands for Saltercino Locomotion on Terrestrial Obstacles, which is capable of stand jumping up to 1 meter. And after seeing how challenging it would be to move rapidly across an urban disaster site, I wanted to figure out how some new strategies for robots of any scale would enable that motion, says Haldane, whose work was recently in the inaugural issue of Science Robotics. Biology was his guide. Special jumpers have a super crouch posture in the leg configuration that allows them to stay down for longer, letting their muscles store energy into their stretchy tendons, which is later released to produce a high-powered jump, just like Locusts. And we built a single degree for freedom leg mechanism that uses this idea new to robotics and showed that we can produce 2.94 times more jumping power than would have been possible without this leg mechanism. Building the leg was hard, and we actually developed new methods for designing linkages to it. But researchers from other parts of the world are developing other types of robots with a search and rescue in mind. For example, an Italian team is developing the Walk-Man. It is not a retro version of the now obsolete portable music player, but nearly a 2-meter tall robot, which would be 6 feet, meant to be a full-fledged member of the SAR team. Euronews reported that Walkman has joints and motions similar to a human body with hands capable of powerful manipulation. So that's frightening. It is reportedly fitted with a stereo vision system, and a rotating 3D laser scanner. Like Haldane, so it's going to look like some sort of Cylon. Like Haldane, the Italian scientist took clues from nature. Many principles that exist in biology, usurping it, have given us the inspiration on how we could design a robot. Research engineers Locusts Selcu tells Euronews, explaining that Walkman relies largely on gravity rather than energy to move. Walkman, BioBots, and Salto may represent the future of rescue bots, but the typical machines used in disaster response today are unmanned aerial, land, and marine vehicles, modestly sized robots that provide vital information about places emergency responders can immediately reach or easily access. In a TED Talk, Murphy says that you can reduce the response to a disaster by 1 day, and you can reduce the overall recovery time by 1,000 days. Ground, aerial, marine systems are becoming commonplace for different types of disasters, and Murphy's team says that their robots have responded to nearly 50 disasters in a dozen countries since 9/11, including Hurricane Katrina and the Crandall Canyon, Utah mine collapse. Hurricane Katrina was the first time an unmanned aerial vehicle was used in a disaster response, and now the UAVs are a key tool for responders needing to get a bird's eye view of a disaster scene. Texas A&M University, Murphy also leads a volunteer search and rescue group, Roboticists Without Borders. Who knew we had one of those? And the organization in part matches professionals in the use of ground, aerial, and marine robots with agencies around the world that are responding to natural disasters. Roboticists Without Borders covers expenses for up to 10 days for each incident. The hope, Murphy says, is to accelerate the adoption and improve the use of robots in disasters. And the goal would be to put Roboticists Without Borders out of business by 2025. Robots can make a disaster go away faster, says Murphy. A little more convenience for you. So look for the robots, because robots are coming to the rescue. Da, da, da. So what do you think about them apples? So we're going to take a look now At the dark secret at the heart of AI. I've mentioned the story quite a few times. This is out of MIT Technology Review. So as we have unmanned aerial vehicles and 6-foot tall humanoid robots and cockroach bots all scanning around in a disaster response, what do we know about artificial intelligence? No one really knows how the most advanced algorithms do what they do. That could be a problem. April 11th, 2017, MIT Technology Review. Last year, a strange self-driving car was released onto the quiet roads of Mammoth City, New Jersey. An experimental vehicle developed by researchers at the chipmaker NVIDIA, robot googly eyes, didn't look different from other autonomous cars, but it was unlike anything demonstrated by Google, Tesla, or General Motors, and it showed the rising power of artificial intelligence. The car didn't follow a single instruction provided by an engineer or programmer. Instead, it relied entirely on an algorithm that had taught itself. Ding! We're reading a lot about self-teaching AI to drive by watching a human do it. Getting a car to drive this way was an impressive feat, but it also was a bit unsettling since it isn't completely clear how the car makes decisions. Information from the vehicle's sensors goes straight into a huge network of artificial neurons that process the data and then deliver commands required to operate the steering wheel, the brakes, and other systems. The result seems to match the responses you'd expect from a human driver, but what if one day it did something unexpected, like crash into a tree or sat at a green light? As things stand now, it might be difficult to find out why, but I think DARPA was working on a whole project to make AI explain itself. The system is so complicated that even the engineers who designed it may struggle to isolate the reason for any single action. And you can't even ask it. There is no obvious way to design such a system so that it could always explain why it did what it did. The mysterious mind of the vehicle points to a looming issue with artificial intelligence, and that is the car's underlying AI technology, known as deep learning, has proven very powerful at solving problems in recent years, and it has been widely deployed for tasks such as image capturing, voice recognition, and language translation. But there is now hope that the same techniques will be able to diagnose deadly diseases, make million-dollar trading decisions, and do countless of other things while transforming whole industries. But this won't happen or shouldn't happen until we find ways of making techniques like deep learning more understandable to their creators and accountable to their users. Otherwise, it would be hard to predict when failures might occur, as it is inevitable they will. Remember, we read some stories about AI going evil, and AI trying to kill its competitors to get the apples or the other chits, or winning in a military strategy game against humans. And that is one reason that NVIDIA's car is still experimental. Already, mathematical models are being used to help determine who makes parole and who is approved for a loan and who gets hired for a job. But if you could get access to the mathematical models, it would be possible to understand their reasoning. But banks, military, employers, and others are now turning their attention to a more complex machine learning approach that can make automated decision-making altogether inscrutable. Deep learning, the most common of these approaches, represents a fundamentally different way to program computers. It is a problem that is already relevant and is going to be much more relevant in the future, says Tommy Jukola, a professor at MIT who works on applications of machine learning. Whether it's an investment decision, a medical decision, or maybe a military decision, you just don't want to rely on the black box method. There is already an argument that is being able to interrogate AI systems about how it's reached its conclusion is a fundamental legal right. And starting in the summer of 2018, the European Union may require that companies be able to give users an explanation for decisions that automated systems reach. This might be impossible even for systems that seem relatively simple on the surface, such as apps and websites that use deep learning to serve ads or recommend songs. But computers that run these services have programmed themselves, and they have done it in ways that we cannot understand. Even the engineers who build these apps cannot fully explain their behavior, and this raises mind-boggling questions. As the technology advances, ding, we might soon cross some threshold beyond which AI requires a leap of faith. Sure, we humans can't always truly explain our thought processes either, but we find ways to intuitively trust engaged people. Will it also be possible with machines that think and make decisions differently from the way humans would. We've never before built machines, ding ding, that operate in ways that their creators don't understand. How well can we expect to communicate and get along with intelligent machines that could be unpredictable and inscrutable? And we've read a few stories that AI has been unpredictable in multiple scenarios, and that would be when its livelihoods or survival is at risk. And that's got to make you wonder. These questions took me on a journey to bleeding edge AI research algorithms from Google to Apple and to many places in between, including a meeting with one of the great philosophers of our time. In 2015, a research group at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York was inspired to apply deep learning to the hospital's vast database of patient records. We've read about that as well. This data set features hundreds of variables on patients drawn from test results, doctors' visits, and so on. And this is what electronic medical health records gives you. And the resulting program, with which researchers named Deep Patient, was trained using data from 700,000 individuals. And when tested on new records, it proved incredibly good at predicting disease. And without any expert instruction, Deep Patient had discovered patterns hidden in hospital data that seemed to indicate when people were on the way to a wide range of ailments, including cancer of the liver. And there are a lot of methods that are pretty good at predicting disease from a patient's record, says Joel Dudley, who leads the Mount Sinai team. But he adds, this was just way better. At the same time, Deep Patient is a bit puzzling. It appears to anticipate the onset of psychiatric disorders, such as schizophrenia, surprisingly well. And since schizophrenia is notoriously difficult for physicians to predict, Dudley wondered how this was possible. He still doesn't know, and the new tool offers no clue as to how it does this. And if something like Deep Patient is actually going to help doctors, it will ideally give them a rationale for its prediction, to reassure them that it is accurate, and to justify, say, a change in the drug someone is being prescribed. We can build these models, says Dudley ruefully, but we don't know how they work. Artificial intelligence hasn't always been this way. From the outset, there were two schools of thought regarding how understandable or explainable AI ought to be. Many thought it made most sense to build machines that reasoned according to the rules and logic, making their inner workings transparent to anyone who cared to examine some code. That's what I would agree with. Others felt that intelligence would more easily emerge if machines took inspiration from biology, and learned by observing and experiencing, and that's giving it the five senses. This means turning computer programming on its head. Instead of a programmer writing commands to solve a problem, the program generates its own algorithms based on example data and the desired output. The machine learning techniques that would later evolve into today's most powerful AI systems followed the latter path, and machines essentially program themselves. At first, this approach was limited practical use, and in the 1960s and 70s, it remained largely confined to the fringes of the field, and I could guarantee you in some of those FEMA bunkers. And then the computerization of many industries and the emergence of large data set renewed interest. That inspired the development of more powerful machine learning techniques, especially new versions of the ones known as artificial neural networks, in which I have one of the very early books that DARPA wrote on that. And by the 1990s, neural networks could automatically digitize handwritten characters. And I think some of that OCR software that allowed them to do that, Kurzweil actually had a hand in. But it was not until the start of this decade, because he did scanners for the blind. It was not until the start of this decade, after several clever tweaks and refinements, that very large or deep neural networks demonstrated dramatic improvements in automated perception. Deep learning is responsible for today's explosion in AI, so are robot googly eyes, and it has given computers extraordinary powers, like the ability to recognize spoken words, so those robot googly ears, as well as most people could, and a skill too complex to code into the machine by hand. Deep learning has transformed computer vision, and dramatically improved machine translation, and now it is being used to guide all sorts of key decisions in medicine, finance, manufacturing, and beyond. So now, that's a really, really long article. I'm running out of breath. Now on to a story that I ran across this morning. CIA tech leader. AI can be, quote, process no one understands. So even a leader in the CIA, September 6, 2017, came out and said, the CIA's head of the Technology Development Division says staying ahead of Russia and China is not as tough as getting U.S. leaders to listen to their own artificial intelligence analysts, Defense One reports. I just want to go faster than Russia and China to keep up, says Don Murex, the CIA's deputy director for science and technology. Said to a national security summit in Washington, Defense One reported, and if there is a bear in the woods, you just have to be faster than the slowest person. The CIA currently has 137 pilot projects directly related to artificial intelligence experiments that include everything from automatically tagging objects in videos, DING, to better predicting future events based on big data and correlational evidence, Defense One reported. Can we back into correlations with cause and effect that will allow us to be more predictive with what's about to go down, such as the North Korean launches? She told the summit, we have that in our pockets. So through U.S. industry and to some degree the government have a technological lead in the AI development, there are real differences in the way the United States and rival nations use it. For example, Russia has shown an increased willingness to mix AI and guns and lethal ground robots, the outlet reported. And Mironik said that the biggest challenge in applying cutting-edge AI products and techniques is convincing government leaders, including Donald Trump, to accept intelligence that comes at least in part from a robot. We produce a presidential daily briefing, she says, and we have to have really, really good evidence for why we reach the conclusions that we do. One of the things that's a challenge for the current AI community, and one of the things that I am positive will get addressed, is you can't go to leadership and make a recommendation based on a process that no one will understand. So there you go. As we have now AI running in the CIA, computer intelligence. Oh, are you kidding me? Hold on. Hold the phone. Please excuse me for one moment. Okay, sorry about that. Nobody was there this time. This is my whole day. All right, so now we find out IBM and IBM Watson, they aren't doing too well, I guess, economically. So they are now working to try to pull a rabbit out of a hat. And IBM is now investing $240 million into AI research labs with MIT as it struggles in its AI battle. Many of the top minds in artificial intelligence are locked up in places like Google, Microsoft, and Facebook. But for old giants like IBM, and the father of IBM Watson, it can be hard to get access to top talent in such hot fields. And despite the vast amounts of marketing money that the company spends on its Watson service. Oh, hold on. My cell phone is now ringing. Well, that's really weird because now there's nobody on my cell phone. But anyway, Google, Microsoft, and Facebook are eating up all the talent, so IBM is crying. It can be hard for them to get hot talent. So despite the vast amount of marketing money the company spends on its Watson service, the company's AI efforts have not been without its bumps. In a recent story this week from health news website Stat, for example, detailed just how far IBM's Watson marketing hype in cancer treatment has actually outpaced the reality. Oh, so Watson isn't doing very well as an oncologist, I guess. On Thursday, IBM said it's investing $240 million over the next 10-year period for a joint AI research effort with the Massachusetts Institute of Technology called the MIT IBM Watson AI Lab. The partnership is supposed to bring together 100 academics to focus on 4 areas of AI research. 1 would be new algorithms, 2 would be hardware, 3 social impact, and 4 business applications. And in algorithm development, the lab will try to figure out what comes after deep learning, a family of popular machine learning techniques. This partnership supports basic research looking for new algorithms that go beyond deep learning, so even faster and better than the deep learning we didn't understand. And though deep learning is an important tool we use, says Anantha P. Shekandrasan, Dean of MIT School of Engineering, in an interview. In particular, the lab will focus on areas like training AI algorithms that don't require extensive supervision, ding ding, and exhaustive manual labeling of data. And right now, many deep learning systems require people to go through and label each piece of data, like, say, that's a car in the image. And remember, we did a story on that as well last week that talked about how they could backdoor the labeling that goes along with that, and someone could sabotage that database to make the AI incorrectly identify items that then could be used as a hijack. In hardware, the lab hopes to move beyond what is popular in AI today, namely graphics processors made by Huho NVIDIA, and start experimenting with processors that don't rely on traditional computer design, such as quantum computing, which is an area that IBM has already been pursuing. We are going to work on inventing new devices and materials that go beyond the use of conventional silicon transistors, says IBM Research Vice President AI Dario Gil in an interview. And it makes you wonder, we read about that Nigerian scientist who is now consolidating biological and silicon material to make a device that can smell, literally. So how far are they going to go? They could use little mini brain balls and give them noses and eyes. And although IBM's research group is spearheading new research efforts, any advancement could be applied to Watson. Shangrik Hassan said that the lab will also encourage new startups to develop around the AI research. IBM is currently undergoing a massive effort to rebuild itself into a company based on cloud and AI, and it has bet billions on Watson, but the business hasn't slowed. 21 quarters of consecutive revenue decline. And in its second quarter earnings posted in July, and I'll tell you why IBM has 21 consecutive quarters of decline. It's because it's a huge behemoth of a company that has decades of top-heavy growth, which is why. And in its second quarter earnings posted in July, the company reported a 2.5% year-over-year decline with $4.6 billion in revenue in its cognitive solutions business. It is hard to see how this lab will help IBM catch up with the competition. Well, MIT is going to give it a little bit of validity. IBM is coming up against massive investment in AI-specific research at groups as Google, Facebook, Microsoft, and Amazon, and Walmart, don't forget. And in a recent note, Jefferies analyst James Kisner argued that IBM is simply outgunned compared to its rivals in AI. Scarce talent is a major issue in the AI market, and our analysis suggests that IBM is not likely to win the war for AI talent. Well, guys, make sure you stick around because it is Friday, all kinds of new radio this weekend, and I will try to catch up with you on Monday. Everybody take care.
Escape